Two major pain points in writing attractive CSS are tables and forms, and therefore they sometimes get forgotten about or are badly implemented. But Bootstrap has some generic styling for both tables and forms that can be extended to make them look really nice. For tables, you can start by adding a table base class to apply some basic styling. This will add some padding and horizontal dividers. Without this base class, all your tables will leave much to be desired. You can add zebra striping by adding the table striped class to the table base class. Want those cells to have borders? Done. Just add table bordered. Adding table hover will add a hover state on table rows inside a tBody tag. Shrink the padding between cells by using table condensed. Highlight rows, columns, or cells within a table by adding classes to their containers. These classes are similar to the tags we saw earlier that could be applied to text. Active will add a hover color to that row or cell. Success will highlight that row or cell in green to indicate a successful or positive action. Warning will highlight the section in yellow, indicating something that might need attention. Danger will highlight that section in red, indicating some negative action. Finally, these tables are responsive by default. But if you have a lot of information and you want your table to scroll horizontally on small screens, you can wrap the table in a table responsive container. This won't look any different on devices larger than 768 pixels wide, but at the SM breakpoint, they will add a horizontal scroll rather than displaying the content within the viewport. Bootstrap table classes can be combined in any way you can dream up to create unique styles without needing any extra CSS. Forms will automatically get some amount of styling, but to make your forms look pretty, wrap labels and controls in a form group class and give your text inputs, text areas, and selects a form control class. Buttons, which I'll cover in detail next, can be given the BTN base class and any of the available button styles like button default or button primary. You can create inline forms with the inputs sitting next to each other by using the form inline class on the form tag. For screen readers, you always want to use labels, but you can hide this by using the SR-only class. Create attractive-looking horizontal forms using Bootstrap's grid classes by using the form class formHorizontal. In this case, the form group class acts the same as the row class, breaking each form group into its own row. At screen sizes smaller than 768 pixels, the inline and horizontal form behavior is dropped and form controls are stacked normally. Most common form input controls are supported natively, but the input type needs to be properly declared for them to be styled fully. Bootstrap supports the HTML placeholder attribute to display some explanatory text inside the form input to describe what the intent of that control is. Checkboxes and radio buttons are stacked by default, but using checkbox inline or radio inline in the wrapper will display them in a horizontal row. To display plain text next to a form label, you can use the form control static class in a p tag. Alternately, you can add a disabled attribute to make that field appear grayed out. You can also add the disabled attribute to the entire field set to disable all the controls in the field set. You can control the sizing of inputs and classes like input LG the same way you could use grid classes like call LG. Create larger or smaller form controls using input LG or input SM. These can be applied to any kind of form input. Form inputs can be put into grid columns like anything else. Create controls according to your grid layout by wrapping them in columns with the standard bootstrapped grid classes. Help text for form controls can be added by adding a div or span with the class help block. Inputs can be tweaked by adding text or buttons before, after, or on both sides of any text-based input. This can be done using input group and input group add-on. Here are a few examples. In the first example, a character was added to the input box before the text input. This is just a span with the class input group add-on inside of an input group wrapper. The next example just adds some text at the end of the input box. It's done the same way, just use input group add-on on the extra stuff and wrap it in an input group. You can guess how the markup for the third, before, and after example works. There's nothing special about the input group add-on class when it's before or after the input box. It works either way. Using the input group class, you can combine elements before and after to provide a lot of different ways of accepting input. Like everything else, input groups can be sized the same way other things can be sized, by adding an input group LG or SM to the input group base class. Other input types can be combined in input groups. Consider adding a radio or checkbox as an input group add-on. This could be used in a series of checkboxes or radios, with the final option being a write-in or other. Buttons can be added to input groups, but they're handled a little bit differently and require an additional level of nesting. Instead of just using input group add-on, you'd need to use input group button to wrap the buttons. And of course, those buttons can be button drop-downs too. Or segmented button drop-downs, where the drop-down toggle is separate from the button. Combining all of these classes and styles can create some really good-looking forms, no matter if your form is a single input or a more complex form with lots of elements.